Greetings and welcome to Conversations with Doc Martin. This video series focuses on extraordinary people doing extraordinary things. And today is certainly no exception because we're joined by Lilli Correll. Lilli is a Fortune 5 healthcare executive and licensed counselor, a dedicated champion of patient-centered solutions within the healthcare industry. She's spoken to crowds of thousands about the patient experience and has been featured by Open Minds, Mental Health America, and the National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. In addition to her corporate experience, Lilli saw clients in clinical practice for nearly 20 years and is a certified clinical trauma provider, continuing to increase her trauma expertise in the research and clinical intervention. There's a lot to say for studied and proven approaches, but Lilli takes it one step further with her lived experience and success in cultivating approaches to draw out the very best in herself and others. Lilli offers powerful lessons that can help anyone rise above their circumstances and create their own unlimited success. So Lilli, welcome to you.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah, super excited to have you. There's so much to unpack. I want to talk about your book. I want to talk about your background and what, why now is the question I typically ask authors. But, we kind of went through your bio, and I think the viewers would kind of be interested in terms of, how and or why you got into your area of expertise to begin with.
Sure. Actually, I was a little hesitant to get into my area of expertise. I think I kind of was avoidant of the clinical arena because of my own personal experiences. And I didn't want to be that clinician that was working out their own issues in the therapeutic process for somebody else.
Yeah.
But as I finished up my undergraduate degree in speech and hearing sciences, I was fairly clear that isn't what I wanted to do. And so I actually took some career tests, and there was just no denying that I am a clinician through and through, probably in my innate being. And so I just decided to go ahead and start studying psychology and starting to pursue the clinical field. And honestly, I think when you step into that space, you probably found this with your own studies of that aligned with you, your grades soar.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
I just felt like I was at home. I felt like the people that I was around were, family. It just was right. And so I continued on my studies.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, you have just published a book, Resolve to Rise, which is a fantastic read. It's a very open and honest tale of your own life and your own trials and tribulations, and gives amazing and useful tools to the reader. And we'll certainly get to your book. And I just was kind of curious. You talked about not wanting to bring your own, if I may be so bold, background or history or baggage, whatever words people want to use, into that clinical arena. When you were thinking about even just the concept of writing a book and putting everything out there, what was going through your head?
I think what I have found both personally and what I've seen professionally with clients and individuals is this sense of being broken and irreparable. And I wanted to create a message for people after I had some, not just lived experience with the trauma, but lived experience with success and the ways that we often define success in our culture, to say that you are not disqualified because you've gone through trauma, and that there is hope and there is something out there for you to claim. I find a lot of the books out there that are extremely informative, wonderful. There's kind of a degree of separation between the writer and the reader. And I wanted to just break down the walls of separation and speak as one human being to another human being about living out your possibilities and your dreams and, being your best self.
Absolutely. Well, it's amazing that was your intention, and that was you very much succeeded in that, because I have to tell you, from like the second page in, I felt like I was just talking to you. And, we had our first initial conversation right around the time I started reading the book. And, I read a lot of books, and that is so hard to do as an author. And, when I was reading your book and you were talking about, the concept of trauma, and I was thinking about, my own life, and, even what I most recently experienced in Mexico, where, there was this drug cartel gun shootout, and, people were running for their lives. And frankly, in the beginning of it, we didn't know it was a drug cartel shootout. We actually thought they were targeting us as an LGBT vacation. And so we very much felt like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And so, what you talk about in your book is that, many people, either don't understand trauma or what trauma is, or define trauma in their own way. So for you, what is trauma for you from a professional perspective?
And that's an excellent question. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there in terms of what is trauma, and really equating trauma to an event that's occurred rather than a person's response to the event. So a person's response to the event, if you have a sense that, like you did in Mexico, that your life is in danger, then you've experienced a trauma, because your body's going to go into a fight or flight response. And what happens to you gets consumed in your body. And if you're not able to discharge it, you carry it with you. So if you run into a certain circumstance that's familiar to you, reminding you of that, and then you notice that you're tensing up and you're stressed out and you're sweating and you're not really sure what happened, that can often happen because of an event that was experienced that was traumatic. And we know oftentimes people experience abuse as traumatic. Now, was their life at risk? Who knows? Did they perceive that their life was at risk? That's the question. And then beyond that, having a situation that is emotionally too difficult to navigate. And so you literally shut down. So people who are being sexually abused oftentimes will say they focused in on an inanimate object. It might be a light fixture or a doorknob or something to kind of disconnect from the experience, because the experience was too emotional to deal with. So they had to kind of split off. That would be indicative of a traumatic event. And so for that person, that is trauma.
I was so, just personally connecting with, in particular, that's what really sucked me in the beginning, even over and above your writing style, which we were just talking about, because you were talking about all these like significant life changes and how people have, kind of trouble dealing with them. And, I have to say that when I became disabled from dentistry, and then we had to move from, Maryland to Florida, never thinking we would be moving to that degree. Years later, I was talking to a therapist, and he was like, well, how have you dealt with this trauma? And I looked at him, and I was like, what do you mean trauma? And, he kind of laid it out. He was like, well, think about what you experienced. Your entire life was upended, your profession was turned around, et cetera, et cetera. And it was so affirming and eye-opening that I was like, oh, that's what it is. And then that explained a lot of other behaviors and things that happened in my life and the way I reacted and those kind of things. And so, when we think about how people react, you were talking about, how people's bodies react and so forth. As we're getting over the hump, let's hope, of the COVID-19 pandemic, there seems to be evidence of trauma everywhere and for people. And what are some of the things that have stuck out most for you, that are most concerning for you relative to people's dealing with the pandemic and how that might be affecting them?
One of the things that seems to often come with any kind of serious trauma is substance use. And you'd almost have to be living under a stone not to have heard that, like, alcohol purchases are way up. And I literally was just reading today an article that came through my inbox about opioid deaths, or I think it was opioid related overdoses, were up 29%.
Wow.
From the prior year.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then suicide.
Mm-hmm.
We're hearing more and more suicide and the social isolation. And I think there's all of those things. And then there is this felt sense, I think we all have on some level, some people more than others, of like, when you start reemerging, how do we re-engage with each other? You know what I mean? Like, it's like, we're almost like, it's like you haven't seen a friend for a really long time and you're kind of socially awkward with them because you're like not even sure like how to engage. And so I think, again, the whole reason for my book was to say what you're feeling, what you're experiencing is normal. That whole idea of a normal reaction to an abnormal situation is abnormal. So if you act like you always do in any given day when something horrendous is happening, that's abnormal. And I think it's important for people to understand that there are impacts and to start to look at what do those impacts look like so I can recognize them and know that I'm going to be okay, that I'm going to be able to come out on the other side. So I think that's going to be really, really important. And a lot of those things, I mean, it was like, as I looked at stress and I looked at what are the reactions that people have to stress, what are the reactions that people have to horrible life incidents? Like you said, the list of, you know, all of these things that happen in people's lives all the time. And then what are the symptoms of then trauma? And they're really the same symptoms. It's just the degree of severity of the symptoms. And so I think what I've heard a lot in feedback about the book already is people saying, I saw the list of symptoms in lots of other books, but I never quite knew if they applied to me until I heard your story. And when you showed your embodiment of these symptoms, I said, oh, I've had those symptoms.
Exactly.
I understand that. And so I'm okay because I'm not alone. This is normal. This is a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. I think we have to really help people understand what normal is in this abnormal experience that we're coming through and out of.
Sure, absolutely. And, you know, I'm certainly, I'm not even remotely in your field. And for me as an observer, somebody who really enjoys the behavioral sciences, I found this lack of adherence to scientific fact very fascinating to me, on an academic level, not a reality level. Just the literal disconnect between, because I've literally had this conversation with certain people where I've said to them something to the effect of, so the last time you went to your doctor, you came in with a certain number of symptoms. He or she diagnosed you, gave you a prescription. Did you go ahead and fill it? Well, yeah. Well, why? Because they're the doctor. Okay, so why isn't this any different? And so whether you're talking about vaccines or masks or whatnot, what observations have you made about individuals that are, you know, let's just say anti-mask or anti-vax relative to a trauma response that people are going through?
I think we're in I want to say a political crisis right now. I think that we've lost trust in each other. Fundamentally. And so when I run across people who say, you know, I'm not going to get vaccinated, and I say, well, help me understand, you know, what, it comes down to fundamental trust. Am I being misled? And that we have to repair that. We have to learn how to listen to each other and hear about, like, why are the people who don't want to be vaccinated not getting vaccinated? Why are the people who don't want to wear masks not wearing masks? If I'm sitting with somebody who doesn't want to wear a mask and I say, hey, I have MS and I have to go get this, you know, infusion, and I'm nuking my immune system. Would you mind wearing a mask while we're together? most people are going to do it because they care about me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what we've lost is a sense of connection with each other.
Yeah.
I think to
Yeah.
care and to share this land that we've been given in our country, to honor and regard the differences.
Yeah.
And build trust. So I personally, I always say Democrat, Republican, I don't know. I'm a simpleton.
Yeah.
I think we all share land.
Yeah.
And so let's regard each other and figure out,
Yeah.
like, if you want to carry a gun and I want to marry a woman, then let's make space for that for each other and figure out how we can do that in a way that feels safe.
Yeah.
And that we can agree to. I feel like we've lost track of some of the most foundational items of why we're here. When you go back to the preamble of the Constitution, it's really quite moving. And absolutely. I think we've just disconnected from being a bunch of people who came over on a boat to, to establish a new way of being and a freedom from, at that point, I think the Catholic Church and the, and so we've lost track of being able to celebrate the differences, I think, and trust each other. And
yeah, absolutely. And along those lines, just the caring and trust for one another, is extending, or let me say, in contrast to the concept of you're impinging on my freedoms. It's like, well, while at the same time, although on the surface that may be true, but if we look at the science and the reality that, you can give me something that could kill me, like, how is your freedoms to make a choice that could end up killing me the right thing to do? And so I like what you said. We've lost this fundamental trust and this connection to humanity to take care, as the phrase goes, your fellow man or fellow woman, of course.
Well, there's people who are honestly, they're terrified.
Yeah.
And they were, when they were abused in their family of origin, they didn't have a choice. And now they're being told by their employer that they have to get vaccinated. Well, that feels like being re-traumatized because I'm having my choice taken away from me.
Okay.
And I'm terrified of doing that. And that's not being regarded. So in terms of like what you were asking about, like, how does that connect in with the trauma? I think it actually does in ways we don't even understand. And if we were listening to each other and hearing each other and building trust, we might be able to find a way to a solution. Yeah. I say that as if it's some simple thing to do. And I'm certainly not saying that, but anyway, I do think that I do think trauma plays into it, and not just the trauma of going through COVID, but the trauma, lived experiences. Trauma is common, unfortunately.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the more we look around, the more we see it, like anything else in life. And so when we talk about, trauma being common, we've, alluded a little bit to your story here and there. And certainly we I want people to go ahead and read the book and read your story in detail, of course, but could you kind of give us a little window into kind of your story and how this kind of ended up developing, not just for you pursuing your own career, but in writing the book, but just you as a human being in general, your story.
Absolutely. When I was a child going through, kind of one traumatic event after the other, I learned fairly young, probably before I can even remember, to dissociate, to and to diminish what I was experiencing. My father helped me somewhat with that and minimizing it because I think it was too much for him to really absorb. And I was pretty good at keeping this positive, until I got into about junior high. And in junior high, it was really hard for me to continue to dissociate. And I was getting really unhappy and self-loathing, and it was just a really hard time. I mean, junior high is hard for everyone.
Yeah, that's true.
Maybe it's traumatic. I don't know. But I just kind of decided to throw my birds up to the world and say, I'm going to drink and I'm going to party and sex. And because if I drank and if I used, marijuana or whatever was offered to me, then I didn't have to feel. And I wasn't prepared to do that. And so when I was 16, my father was in 12-step recovery. I went ahead and I had been going to these Alateen meetings and basically lying through my teeth. And I just decided, I think I want what they have. And I think I don't want what I have. I don't feel good. This is not the person I want to be. And so I started to do that and started to really kind of seek out being kind of present with myself. As the 12-step program likes to say, taking life on life's terms. And around that time, I used to have songs that I said, this is my song with God. And my song with God was You Needed Me at 16. And I really believed at that point that my life was being redeemed, that I was getting a second chance, and that I was going to share at some point. It took 35 years, but I really believed that. And it kept coming to me that that was something I was going to do. And I got clearer and clearer that I was going to write a book and that I wanted to do inspirational speaking, and that God had equipped me with a few things that would really make that a possibility. And that was that I was courageous. I would share with people if I thought it was going to benefit them. And that I could articulate my internal experience fairly well, because people were repeatedly telling me, wow, I've always felt that way, but I never quite knew how to say it. That's exactly how I feel. And I kept getting that feedback. And then I had this sense that I need to grow in the corporate environment, so there's some level of credibility. And when I do finally share, that people can't, like, at some level in their corporate experience, say, oh, well, that doesn't apply to me because I have this success. Or so it was like I was breaking down over time these barriers that people put up to say, well, that's different than me, so that I would eventually then share my story. And not just share my story, but share tools and help equip people in their story, understanding that my story wasn't as unique as I once had thought it was. And I wasn't as shameful and detestable as I thought I was. And they aren't either, that reader, that person who is reading it. So it was really like 2019, December, when my friend said, after I read her a little journal excerpt, she said, oh my gosh, Lilli, you should write a book. And for whatever reason at that moment, I felt like it was time. And then of course, COVID hit and I was like, holy moly, it's time. I mean, there's no way you can that. And so I'm like, yeah, it's definitely time. That's really like my life as it was culminating. I knew I wanted to do something bold, and I wanted to offer hope and a different narrative to people than I was growing up with, that kind of kept me stuck.
Yeah. I'm fascinated because you just used the word stuck, and that was actually what was going through my head with people that, they've ended up navigating their own lives for so many years, and just the inertia of their life and their perspective, they just feel like, well, this is my life, this is my normal, and they don't even realize that there's an alternative possibility that they can pursue. It's kind of like what you said, when you were younger and you were like, I don't think I want this anymore. And so that's a big leap for some people to have that level of realization, to be like, I don't want to do this anymore. And maybe I don't have to do this anymore. And so, whether it's, seeking outside resources, reading your book, all those kind of things to kind of help people see things differently, to be able to move forward. And so
absolutely,
it's very courageous for people. I think a lot of people don't necessarily realize, if they haven't had to ask for help before, how difficult that first step is. The second, third, and 500th is a hell of a lot easier than that first one, because that first one means to many that you needed to ask. And when you need to ask, that's, it becomes very empowering, but it also feels very threatening to a lot of people. And I was just kind of curious. It just kind of came to my mind. I hadn't necessarily intended to ask this, but in your experience with people and taking that first step, like, what if what if anything have you observed relative to people's first steps? I mean, we're all we're all unique individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Yet, what kind of things have you observed over the years with people taking that first step to get something different for themselves?
When usually you think of the first step as making a phone call to schedule an appointment with a therapist.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And I believe there's research out there that actually shows that the level of hope increases after
Mm-hmm.
you make the phone call, before you've had the session.
Yeah.
And that the problem actually gets better.
Yeah.
In between making the phone call and actually going to the first session. So that's really interesting, I think.
Absolutely.
I think, honestly, the first step for me, it's funny because you were saying the first step's the hardest, and that is true. That has been true for me when it comes to like exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll say, okay, I'm going to start exercising tomorrow. And I'll say that for like 365 days. And so tomorrow gets pushed out. And that's the hardest. And then once I start exercising, I'm good. I'm going. I get some momentum going. In doing therapeutic work, there's this expectation that I'm making progress. And so, and you are.
Mm-hmm.
But then let's say you get triggered, and now you're feeling all that same anxiety that you used to feel, and you're feeling that self-loathing, and you have that inner critic that's saying, look at you, I can't believe you feel this way. And then you have the rational part of your brain that's saying you should be able to react in this way, but you can't. You find yourself that continuing to move forward it's like what I talk about in the book about that whole base camp.
Mm-hmm.
When you're like, son of a bitch. I hope that's okay for me to say.
Totally.
And I have to go all the way back. Are you kidding me? I have to go all the way back down.
Yeah.
And so I think we misunderstand that as we're starting over again.
Mm.
And we're not, because if you remember, like, the base camp idea is that I went to the first, right? And now I get to go to the second, or I get to go to the third, or I get to go to the peak.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's all forward momentum.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's harder, the continuation of it. But I mean, initially, I think people come in, unless they're brought by a spouse and they really don't want to be there, which does happen.
Yeah.
They come in with a modicum of hope, typically, that there's help. I think I like to caution people too, that we give, and I think you probably as a provider yourself maybe can appreciate this, we give too much credit to providers.
Mm.
And so when the help isn't helping, we think that the problem must be with us.
Mm.
And oftentimes, especially in this situation, it's not. It may not be the right approach. It may not be the right person. They may be great for 25 other people, but they're not great for you.
Yep.
So I think I'd really want people to know, as they're starting out, to be aware of that. You can fire your therapist.
Sure. Absolutely.
It's not about the therapist. If the therapist is hurt or offended by that, they can go work on that with their own therapist.
Yeah.
And they should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And, and at least I'm only speaking from my own experience, because there's tools and then there's chemistry. And, I have what I feel is a wonderful bag of tools, yet I had a chemistry challenge that got corrected. And then all of a sudden the tools became so much more effective. And, then all of a sudden I started taking off like a rocket ship to kind of be in a place that I wanted to be. And it was such a wonderful thing. And, just the recognition for myself that it was like, oh, well, maybe something's not right. Maybe you need some additional, help. And I would even say to you, coming back from Mexico, going back to this base camp idea, like the first couple of days that I was back, I felt like I had retreated back to some older thought patterns. And I remember thinking to myself, I was like, I thought I was through this. Like, what is happening? Right. And so those traumatic experiences, I'm here to say, yep, you're right. Bring it back to that base camp. And if you have the right support, whatever that may be, to help you kind of start to go up again, that's where the magic happens. So
absolutely.
I think it's like so many things in life where, we assume that it's this linear upward trajectory, when in fact it's like, life is not like that at all. Just even talking about I think you were talking about the statistics of the frequency of traumatic events, and that actually shocked me a bit. And so could you speak to that a little bit about what the research shows and what people experience versus what they expect for the traumatic experiences?
Yeah. Honestly, it shocks me, to be honest with you. I spent all this time putting all this research out there, 60% of this, and, 2/3 of this, and, individuals experiencing traumatic events. It's hard to consume that information and really buy into it. And yet I put a book out there and people are responding to it. And I'm like, wow, this is really common. Like I've realized that I have made assumptions that certain people in my life did not have traumatic experiences, and I was wrong.
Yeah.
So, so there's that. I think the other thing is that there's a lot of confusion around memory, especially when it comes to people on the outside looking in, that if somebody's memory is fragmented, or if they can't remember who was there, or it's spotty, or that's common with trauma. That's not, sometimes people say, oh, well, maybe it didn't happen. No, that's common with trauma. And again, it's that those coping mechanisms that we all develop to navigate impossible situations are very effective during the situation that was impossible. Now you've come out on the other side, and you're continuing to employ these techniques that you've learned, and now they're disruptive. I think that was a really important thing that I wanted to make sure I brought forward, was that even therapists, even clinicians may be quick to say, basically stop being suicidal. I'm oversimplifying.
Sure.
Right. Do this instead. Without understanding what has being suicidal served for you.
Yep.
And maybe, I know for me, like I'd have something happen and I'd say, I'm tapping out, forget, I'm done. I'd like school. My dad forgot to pay my tuition at one point. I lost all of my classes. I had to re-register. I couldn't get into some of my classes. I was so upset that I was having to do this. I just said, forget it. I'm not going back to school. And then I went back and I registered. But that whole process for me was me putting myself in control.
Yep.
And I didn't realize that was what was happening. It was later on I realized, oh, that's what I do when I feel like I'm not in the driver's seat and if something's happening at me or to me, that I want to say, fine, I'm not going to do it. So now I have choice. And then I can say, okay, never mind, I am.
Absolutely. And then that in by itself is the choice. And so it's almost like controlling on two different ends to make yourself feel better.
And yet probably not very functional if you're in a relationship and something comes up and it upsets you and you're like, peace out, I'm done. And then it's like, just kidding, I'm back.
Exactly.
That doesn't work. It's not functional. Like
absolutely.
it helped me navigate, and now it is disruptive in my relationship. So I think that's important too, to understand that it served a purpose, and then it's not because you're defective that you're doing this ridiculous thing that you now see and you go, why do I do that? It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
It was adaptive, and it's what
Yeah.
helped you survive. And you have to respect that.
Yeah.
And then figure out, what do I need to do instead?
Yeah. No, I think that's a wonderful bit of insight, and if I may be so bold, advice, if you will. And so kind of as we kind of wrap up our time together, it's been a real pleasure. I always like to kind of wrap up with my guests with a kind of a more global question based on the topic, if you will. And so, you know, if you ran into somebody and you were just chit-chatting with them, and the subject of trauma came up, what do you think some of the most important things people need to understand, maybe not necessarily know, but understand about trauma?
I feel like I'm kind of a broken record a little bit, but
That's okay.
which I guess just reinforces that I focused on the right things.
Yes,
in my book.
exactly.
I think again that it's common. That
Yep.
it's unfortunately it is
Yep.
common.
Yep.
That it changes the brain.
Mm-hmm.
You can actually see it on a scan.
Mm-hmm.
And that you can heal from it.
Mm-hmm.
Things can improve. I think those are probably the three most important things to me.
Yeah, I love that. And those three things in them by themselves instill hope for the future, that, you know, yes, something happened. Yes, it's changed you, but yes, you can come out the other side and live your life on your terms in the way that you choose to do. So fantastic. I think that was absolutely awesome. And
Thank you.
It wasn't a broken record. So, Lilli Correll, we want to sincerely thank you for your time. We're going to go ahead and put all of the links that you shared with us in the comments below.
Thank you.
And, you know, I just want to sincerely thank everybody for their time and watching our little chit chat here today. And so please don't forget to hit subscribe and click notifications so you don't miss out on any of our upcoming interviews with these extraordinary people. And remember, life speaks to you. And if you think it doesn't, you're not listening. Take care, everybody. Thank you, Lilli. See you next time. Bye-bye.